You know, when we read these parables from Jesus, I have a very hard time not trying to determine who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. I always feel as if there's a place in the parable that I am supposed to be, or I'm supposed to relate to, which is, after all, the purpose of a parable. They're supposed to evoke thinking and learning. They're supposed to make us wonder. And even sometimes they're supposed to confuse us. But today's parable is pretty straightforward. There's nothing too controversial, at least in today's world, about the Good Shepherd. I mean, Jesus is the Good Shepherd, and he loves the sheep. And I'm pretty on board with that, especially if I get to be a sheep. They're cute and they're fluffy. Okay, not really. If you've been to a farm or the county fair, you know they're actually sort of smelly and dirty, and they look fairly ridiculous when they've been sheared. But still, since Jesus loves the sheep and he's willing to lay his life down for the sheep, then given the choice, I'd rather be the sheep than the hired hand. The hired hand is such a scaredy cat. At the first sign of trouble, he takes his money and runs. Doesn't seem to give a second thought to the sheep. Leaves them to fend for themselves. So not only is the hired hand a scaredy cat, but he's also fairly fickle, too. Reading this parable, I don't like the hired hand. I like the sheep. I relate to the sheep. And the Good Shepherd, I like him too. But the hired hand seems to be only interested in his ROI, his return on investment. You know, weighing the risk against the investment to determine the profit or the rate of return. What's in it for him? Are the tangibles, the money, the resources, the opportunities worth his time? And apparently, wolves constitute too great a risk, one that sends the hired hand packing. A bunch of dead sheep aren't going to produce a positive product no matter how you massage the data. Now, the truth of the matter is, hired hands leave for a multitude of reasons. Not just wolves, not just imminent danger. Sure, we leave if we get scared, but sometimes us hired hands leave because we're bored. The job is just not exciting anymore. Or sometimes we've put a lot into it, and we're just not seeing the results of our labor. So going someplace else, we might actually see something good kind of come out of all of our work. And honestly, sometimes I think we go away and we don't even know that we've left the sheep all alone. The novelty of the job wears off. And the sheep are left to wander off. Sometimes they don't even wander. Sometimes the sheep just sit there, looking around and wondering whatever happened to the hired hands. Well, I don't want to be the hired hand, but sometimes I am, unfortunately. See, even when I haven't physically left, I've still abandoned people. We've all done this, right? Be it family or friends or work, or even in specific situations. Fields catch our attention for short moments. Remember the tsunami in Japan? That was just over a year ago. And I don't know about you, but I've forgotten a bit about it. The devastation that must still exist there, it doesn't weigh on my mind like it did 12 months ago, and it probably should. Or what about the famine in Somalia? You know, just last summer, we were talking about this. Well, most of us haven't, at least not recently, talked about it. Did you know that the UN has declared that the famine is actually over due to a bumper crop, due to amazing amounts of aid that have poured in? That's a good thing. And we didn't even know about it. At least not many of us. Well, those fields where the sheep all seek shelter are so very, very far away from here. Well, there's another field I know. And some of you may even be from this field. It's one we've talked about before. We actually even prayed for this field last summer. The name of this field is Pennsylvania. Last year, remember, torrential flooding hit that field. Waters laced with sewage saturated the area. And some of the sheep stayed. And some of the sheep wandered off. But aid poured in, and people went to rebuild, and the waters subsided, and the wolves, which were knocking on the doors, were no longer breathing down their necks. So the hired hands left. If you were to drive through these areas in Pennsylvania today, you would see houses that look just like your house and my house. They have porches and decks. There are small ones and large ones, brick ones and painted ones, old homes and new homes. Driving through the center of town, this is what you would see. But if we were to go in, if someone invited us into one of these homes, if we actually knew the people, if we knew the sheep, then we would know that inside the house tells a very different story. Inside the house, the basement is still ruined from the water seeping up out of the ground. Inside the house, the electrical wiring is still rusted out, and inside the house still sit the remains of dreams which were ruined. Still, today. The sheep didn't even have to wander off to be abandoned. 9 months after many of the hired hands have left, the sheep are out to pasture in the field of life. And where are the hired hands? Well, maybe not where we think at this point. See, like I said, I want to not like the hired hand because it seems like he or she just doesn't seem to get it. But would it not be true that the hired hands are just as lost as the sheep? Have the wolves not also led the hired hands astray, scared them with thoughts of failure, lured them to greener pastures? Have the wolves not tried to claw their way in? Wolves try to swallow hearts whole, because wolves know something that the Good Shepherd knows too. The heart is a scary thing, because it's full of love. The wolf knows that love is the thing that will not only protect the sheep, but save the hired hand. The best way to destroy a flock is to swallow the heart. But the Good Shepherd is quite cunning himself. He knows this too. But he knows something that the wolf doesn't know. The Good Shepherd knows that at the heart of the hired hand is really a keeper. See, the truth is we aren't the Good Shepherd. We aren't Jesus. We will run, and we will get scared and leave. But the shepherd brings us back. The sheep and the hired hand. He must. The Good Shepherd knows no other way, for it's in his very nature to love, to stop at nothing, not even sparing his own life for the sake of the flock. For him not to do so, for him not to stop at nothing, would be for him to allow his own heart to be swallowed. And that's something that has never and will never happen to the Good Shepherd. Jesus lays down his life for the entire field. Not so we don't have to worry about the field, but because that's the type of love that will withstand the wolves. And that's scary love. Jesus' return on investment has everything to do with the people, the sheep and the hired hands, and nothing to do with what's in it for him. And it will not only keep our hearts, but it will turn us into keepers. Jesus does actually want the hired hand to leave. That piece within all of us that asks, what's in it for me? Once the hired hand takes off, Jesus can grasp our hearts. And that's a bit scary too. I said earlier that the heart is a scary thing, and it is, because it can surprise us, take hold of us, and change us. And maybe the best way to explain this would be for me to tell you about a keeper. Well, I met this keeper last week. His name is Dennis. And Dennis, the keeper, told me about the insides of those houses. And he tends the Pennsylvania field. The ROI on this could be pretty low. All the time that he's put into it when really it wasn't his responsibility, and the resources for one house, an old house at that. See, I've not been in these houses, but he has. He told me about the 97-year-old man's house that they refurbished. He shared what it was like to worship God in a place that knew so much devastation. And he even spoke with love in his eyes when he talked about government agencies. How often does that happen? It certainly wasn't because he calculated what could and could not be done with some resources. It was only because he had been kept by Jesus. I couldn't help but notice the aliveness in his eyes and realize that he didn't only know the people, but he knew himself. Keepers keep the stories. And they keep the people. Those that they find easy to love and those they find hard to love. They keep the love they've known, however unexplainable, on the tip of their tongue, so that when someone says to them, "So tell me about this trip you're taking to Pennsylvania," it can't help but pour out of their hearts. Wolves hate that. That keeper, Dennis, he invited us here to go to that field called Pennsylvania, and I'm going with him. I want to see his field, and I want to work in this field, and I want to learn how to keep that field. Well, Keeper Dennis didn't say it in this way. His stories told me that the Good Shepherd is there too, and I really want to see him. I really want to know him more. Would you like to come too? Because we're all invited to go and tend to this field, to not only rebuild and clean as hired hands, but to be kept by those who already love this place and to learn how to keep. Some of you may have received via email some of this information, and like I said earlier, there's a blurb in the bulletin. But if you are at all interested in traveling to this field on May 18th, please let me know. The more hands, the better. When we're all in one place together, grazing and drinking, tending and caring, then we become flock. and will wander. But the Good Shepherd is always running about the edges of the field, looking for anyone who's been abandoned and tossing them back in for the keepers to care for.